Hello folks, I just watched the video concerning 10 things that Christians must answer, and though I am not a Christian, and I'm also not an atheist, in fact I'm not going to mention what I am because it's really not important, my problem is with the logic of the argument, not with the semantics of whether it's right or wrong and blah blah blah, whether you're a Christian or an atheist, because that fight will quite frankly never be decided. People will never stop arguing it. But there are a couple actual logical problems with the video. First off, let's consider the fact that the video makes logical appeals. It says, please use your sound mind and judgment because you're an educated person and blah blah blah, which is nice, but the little problem with that is if you're going to appeal to people on a logical standpoint, you have to then be logical as a result of it. And for the most part, the video does make a lot of logical arguments. Some interesting ones that I had never thought of myself, I have to admit. But at the same time, there are some problems. Problem number one, God is infinite. This is an assertion. Because God cannot be proven to exist one way or the other, Christians cannot offer valid, absolute, empirical evidence of God, and atheists can't prove the opposite. They can't truly prove that God doesn't exist. Neither side has won this argument. So we don't actually know if God exists, so therefore we can't tell the scope of God's power. Is God infinite? Is God finite? Judeo-Christian upbringing makes people believe that, or leads them to believe that God is infinite. The Greeks believed that God was finite. In fact, all of their gods were able to trick one another. They were not all-knowing. They were certainly powerful, but even the gods had their actions governed by the fates, so to speak. So if you look at the total number of religions that have existed in the world, the majority of them believe that gods are finite in power. Now, the total sum of people who believe in these religions is overwhelmingly in the camp of the Judeo-Christian groups, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And of course, all three of them believe that God is omnipotent, all-powerful, and everything like that. And I'm not even saying they're wrong. But if you're going to logically assert that because God doesn't, let's say, fix an amputated limb, God doesn't exist, you must consider the possibility that God might not be able to, because God might not be all-powerful. Yes, I know everybody's become angry hearing that, but it's a possibility that must be considered if you're going to look at this rationally. And if you're going to discount that just because you don't like it, or because it's an uncomfortable or even impossible notion to you, then you can't turn around afterwards and then say that people are discounting things for the exact same reason, therefore they're wrong. Because that's logically wrong in itself. You can't have one or the other like that. I mean, such a thing does exist. It's called a disjunctive syllogism. A or B, not A, therefore B. But the problem with the disjunctive syllogism is it only holds up in the simplest of events. I'm going to now go drink a Coke or a Pepsi. I drank a Coke, therefore I did not drink a Pepsi. That's perfectly fine. But it doesn't hold up in the real world of so many different events occurring and all these different variables that you have to calculate when you're considering things like that. My second problem is with the love of God. We always classically assume, God is all-loving. We understand God. God is a loving, caring creature. Well, hold on a minute. If we're created in God's image, I might add a Judeo-Christian view, which I do not fully subscribe to. If we're created in God's image, we don't all love uniformly. Why must God? We always assume that God can't possibly wish anything bad upon anyone whatsoever and treats us all so democratically, wonderfully, equally. That's wonderful and everything like that, and I'm not even saying it's wrong. God, I hope it's right. But why must it be right? If we're going to consider this logically, why must we make that assertion? Both that and the first assertions, they cloud the answers of every single question afterwards and drastically change the outcome of the answers. The whole deal of where God must be imaginary for everything to fit in perfectly, that's all well and good as long as the first two assertions, which are not spoken but just assumed, are taken into account. Lastly, I'd like to get back to the whole point of A or B, not A, therefore B. They constantly bring up the concept that God produces a miracle, for instance. Well, there's no evidence for this particular miracle, therefore God can't exist. These are actually what's called denying the consequent arguments. Denying the consequent. That means if I drink a Coke, then you do not have a Coke. I drank a Coke, therefore you do not have a Coke. I'm affirming my antecedent, which means I'm agreeing with the beginning part of my argument. I did drink the Coke, or didn't drink the Coke, or whatnot. If you deny the second part of it, then that's actually a logical fallacy. A good example of that would be if I have a ball, that's the antecedent, then I will bounce the ball. That's the consequent. Well, if I have a ball, we're affirming the beginning part, the antecedent, then I'll be bouncing that ball, and that statement is true. But if you look and you see me not bouncing a ball, then you're saying I am not bouncing a ball, I'm denying the consequent, therefore I must not have a ball. Well, that actually is logically invalid. How do you know, for instance, a simple thing, how do you know that I haven't already bounced the ball? It's logically invalid. So, because Christians don't have valid answers to these questions, does not make the original questions wrong in the first place. Not to defend them too much, but then again, nobody took into account the assertions at the very beginning. And I just really wish people would open up and consider everything, as opposed to just saying we have to fight and argue our little differences in these tiny little boxes of assertions that we all have. Anyhow, I will be awaiting all the massive amounts of flack and arguments I'll get as a result of this. Bye-bye.